The crystal halls of the Galactic Forum stretched for miles beneath the surface of Nexus Prime. For 12,000 years, this place had been the center of everything important in the galaxy. 300 different species came here to talk, to trade, and to solve their problems. The Forum was supposed to keep peace. It was supposed to protect the weak from the strong. That was the promise anyway. Captain Daniel Harper stood in the visitors' gallery, watching the assembly floor below. He had been coming to this place for 6 months now, and every day made him angrier. Daniel was not a man who angered easily. He had spent 20 years in the human diplomatic corps, always calm, always professional. But what he had discovered in the past half-year had changed something inside him. The floor below was filled with delegates from across the galaxy. The Valkyries sat in their temperature-controlled pods, their slug-like bodies glistening under the lights. The Sothon representatives stood tall on their 4 legs, their crystal eyes reflecting everything around them. The Harmony Collective sent their hive mind speakers, dozens of small creatures that spoke as one voice. Every species had their place, their traditions, their power. Humanity had been members of the Forum for 70 years. They were still considered newcomers. Some species had been here for thousands of years, before humans even discovered fire. Daniel had learned to accept being treated like children by beings who measured their lives in centuries. He had learned to be patient with species who saw humans as barely civilized. What he could not accept was lies. What he could not accept was corruption disguised as order. Ambassador Lisa Grant sat on the human bench below, reading through documents on her tablet. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had been humanity's chief representative for 15 years. Daniel had sent her everything he found, every piece of evidence, every proof of what the Forum really was. The tribunal was supposed to enforce the Forum's laws. They were supposed to protect developing species from being exploited. They were supposed to be neutral, fair, and just. Daniel had believed that once. He had wanted to believe it. The truth was different. The truth was ugly. Daniel had started his investigation after hearing rumors from a Kelvin merchant. The Kelvin were a peaceful species, focused on trade and art. They had been under Valkyrie protection for 300 years. The merchant had been drunk on human whiskey when he talked too much. He mentioned payments. He mentioned quotas. He mentioned children taken as labor and called it education. Daniel started looking into it quietly. He used his security clearance to access old tribunal records. What he found made him sick. The Valkyrie had been collecting 70% of all Kelvin economic output for 3 centuries. They called it a protection fee. The tribunal had approved it. The records showed 16 complaints from Kelvin representatives, all dismissed. The tribunal claimed the arrangement was voluntary. But that was just one species. Daniel kept digging. The Sostan Empire controlled 42 smaller civilizations. The Harmony Collective had 23 species under their guidance. The patterns were everywhere once he knew what to look for. Bribes in the tribunal records, marked as administrative fees. Forced technology transfers called cultural exchanges. Entire populations relocated and called humanitarian assistance. The worst part was how organized it was. The Council of Elders, the 5 most powerful species in the Forum, had created this system thousands of years ago. They had built an empire and called it civilization. They had created slavery and called it mentorship. Daniel had compiled everything into a report. 3,000 pages of evidence, bank transfers, communication records, testimony from dozens of species who were too afraid to speak publicly. He had given it all to Lisa Grant 2 weeks ago. Today was the day she would present it to the full assembly. The chamber bell rang, a deep sound that vibrated through the floor. All conversations stopped. The Speaker of the Forum, A Harmony collective named Voice of Reason called the session to order. Lisa Grant stood. Her voice was steady as she requested time to address the assembly on a matter of urgent importance. The speaker granted her request. Daniel felt his heart beating faster. Lisa began calmly. She explained that humanity had conducted an investigation into tribunal operations. She stated that irregularities had been found. She projected the first document onto the chamber's main display. It was a tribunal approval form from 200 years ago. It authorized the Valkyrie to extract resources from a Kelvin colony world. The estimated value was listed. The percentage given to the tribunal members who approved it was listed right below it. The chamber went silent. Not the good kind of silent, where everyone was listening. The bad kind, where everyone was holding their breath. Lisa continued. She showed transfer records. She showed communications between tribunal members discussing which species to approve for exploitation and which to protect, based on political favors. She showed classified reports that proved the tribunal knew about atrocities and chose to ignore them. Daniel watched the faces in the chamber. Some species looked shocked. Others looked away. The Valkyrie representative was perfectly still. The Sosthan delegates whispered among themselves. The Council of Elders sat in their raised platform at the front of the chamber. Elder Jarn, a being that looked like living stone, finally spoke. His voice was deep and ancient. This assembly will not be disrupted by unfounded accusations from a species barely a century removed from planetary warfare, Jarn said. Humanity presumes to lecture civilizations that built the foundations of galactic society while your world was still cooling from its formation. These documents are taken out of context. These accusations are born from misunderstanding our complex systems of governance. Lisa Grant did not raise her voice. She did not need to. We understand perfectly well, she said. We understand that this forum has become a tool for the powerful to control the weak. We understand that the tribunal serves not justice, but the interests of those who pay them. We understand that humanity was invited to join this institution not as equals, but as another species to be eventually brought under control. She paused, looking around the chamber. We came here believing in the promise of the Galactic Forum. We believed in cooperation between species. We believed in justice and fairness. We were wrong. Daniel saw what was coming. He had known this moment would arrive, when Lisa had called him the night before. She had asked him if he was sure, if he really believed there was no saving this institution. He had told her the truth. Some things were too broken to fix. Effective immediately, Lisa Grant said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Forum. We will no longer participate in this assembly. We will no longer recognize tribunal authority. We will no longer contribute resources to an organization built on oppression. No species had ever left the forum voluntarily. Membership was supposed to be forever. The idea of leaving was unthinkable. Elder Jarn stood, and for the first time, Daniel heard something like fear in his voice. You cannot simply leave. There are procedures, there are treaties, there are obligations. Lisa Grant was already walking toward the exit. The entire human delegation stood and followed her. Daniel left the gallery and met them in the corridor outside. Is it done? He asked. Lisa nodded. It's done. Behind them, they could hear the chamber erupting into chaos. Species were shouting. The speaker was calling for order. The council was demanding the humans' return. But the human delegation kept walking. They walked out of the crystal halls, out of the forum complex, and onto their shuttle. Within hours, they would be off Nexus Prime. Within days, every human representative would be recalled from forum territories. The galaxy had watched in confusion as humanity presented evidence of corruption. Now, the galaxy watched in shock as humanity simply walked away. What they did not yet understand was that the real terror was still to come. Because humanity had not just left. They had shown every other oppressed species in the galaxy that leaving was possible. And that changed everything. The first week after humanity left, the Forum tried to pretend nothing had changed. Delegates still gathered in the crystal halls. The tribunal still heard cases. The Council of Elders still issued pronouncements about galactic stability. But everyone could feel the difference. It was like a song with missing notes. Commander Jake Sullivan stood on the observation deck of the medical station orbiting Kelvin Prime. He had been the director of this facility for 5 years. Below him, the planet glowed blue and green. Every day, thousands of patients from dozens of species came here for treatment. The humans had built this station. The humans ran it. The humans paid for everything. Now he had orders to shut it down. "How many patients do we have currently?" Jake asked his assistant, a young woman named Katie Morris. Katie checked her tablet. 2,347. Another 800 scheduled to arrive this week. Most of them are Kelvin, but we have patients from 19 other species. Jake nodded slowly. "Start contacting them. Tell them we are ceasing operations in 30 days. Transfer as many as we can to local facilities. For the rest, we will provide transportation to Forum medical centers." Katie looked troubled. "Sir, the Forum facilities charge fees. Most of these patients cannot afford treatment there. That is why they come here." "I know," Jake said quietly, "but we have our orders. Humanity is no longer participating in Forum operations. That includes charitable operations." The medical station was one of 43 that humans operated throughout Forum space. They had been built over the past 70 years, placed in regions where medical care was scarce. The humans had never charged for treatment. They had never asked for anything in return. They had just wanted to help. That was ending now. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. Dr. Amy Peterson was shutting down the Joint Research Facility on Nexus Prime, where humans and 17 other species had been working on faster-than-light communication improvements. Engineer Carl Bennett was halting construction on infrastructure projects that would have brought clean water to 14 developing worlds. The projects were half-finished. They would probably never be completed. The Forum had not realized how much humanity had been giving them. It had seemed natural somehow. The humans were rich, they had resources, they were generous. Nobody had stopped to think about what would happen if that generosity was withdrawn. The second week, the economy began to show cracks. Captain Nicole Wright commanded a human merchant fleet, 20 cargo ships that ran regular routes between Earth and the outer colonies. Her ships also carried goods for other species, connecting trade networks across vast distances. She charged fair rates. Sometimes she carried emergency supplies for free. Now she received new instructions from Earth. Continue commercial operations, but only on a bilateral basis. No more participation in Forum trade agreements. No more using Forum waystation facilities. No more following Forum trade routes that required paying access fees to species that controlled key jump points. Nicole looked at the route map on her screen. Half her regular stops were inside Forum territories that charged human ships transit fees. Those fees had always been reasonable. Humanity had never complained. They had paid them as part of being good Forum members. "Plot new routes," Nicole told her navigator, a man named Sam Peterson. "Avoid all Forum-controlled space where possible. Where it is not possible, we will pay transit fees, but we will not carry cargo for Forum members." Sam studied the map. "That is going to add weeks to some routes, and we are going to have to drop about 60% of our regular customers." "I know," Nicole said. "Send them a message, polite but clear. Humanity will continue trading with any species on an individual basis, but we will not participate in Forum-sanctioned trade networks anymore." The impact was immediate. Human trade routes had connected distant parts of the galaxy. A merchant from the Harmony Collective might send goods through human ships to reach the Outer Rim, saving months of travel time. Those connections were being severed. But it was not just trade. It was everything. The Forum operated on a system of complex translation technology. With 300 species speaking thousands of languages, communication had always been a challenge. Humans had contributed their artificial intelligence systems to improve translation accuracy. Human linguists had spent decades creating better translation databases. Now those systems were being withdrawn. The AI cores were removed from Forum facilities. The linguists were recalled. Translation quality dropped overnight. Misunderstandings increased. Disputes that would have been easily resolved became conflicts. Ambassador Victor Chen of the Harmony Collective was one of the first to recognize the crisis. He had worked closely with humans for 20 years. He considered many of them friends. He had been shocked by their withdrawal, but he had assumed it was an emotional reaction. He thought they would cool down and return within a few months. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, he knew he had been wrong. Victor sent an urgent message to Earth, marked for immediate attention of President Karen White. He explained the situation. He suggested a compromise. Perhaps humanity could return if certain reforms were made to the tribunal. The response came from Lisa Grant, no longer titled as ambassador. Her message was brief. Ambassador Chen, humanity appreciates your concern. However, we are not interested in reforming the tribunal. We are not interested in renegotiating our membership. The Galactic Forum is a corrupt institution built on the exploitation of weaker species. We will not participate in it under any circumstances. Please direct all future communications through standard diplomatic channels between our respective governments, not through Forum offices. Victor read the message 3 times. The finality of it was stunning. The humans were not bluffing. They were not posturing for better terms. They were done. He began making calls to other species. He found that many of them were receiving similar messages from humans. Trade would continue, but only on direct terms. Scientific cooperation would continue, but only through bilateral agreements. Humanitarian aid would be considered on a case-by-case basis. What would not continue was any activity that supported the Forum structure. The 4th week, the humanitarian crisis began. On the frontier world of Callian 7, 3,000 colonists from a developing species called the Prin had been dependent on food shipments coordinated through the Forum aid program. The humans had been providing 70% of those shipments, though few people had realized it. The shipments stopped. The Forum scrambled to find alternative sources. They contacted the Valkyrie, who demanded payment. They contacted the Sostan Empire, who said they were not in the charity business. They contacted a dozen other species. Everyone wanted payment. Everyone wanted something in return. The Forum had operated for thousands of years on a simple assumption. There would always be enough resources, because the rich species would contribute them. The humans had been contributing more than anyone else, but it had seemed like such a natural thing. They were wealthy. They were generous. They would always help. Now the Forum understood. The humans had been holding together systems that would have collapsed without them, and they had done it so quietly, so efficiently, that nobody had noticed. Elder Jarn called an emergency council meeting in the 5th week. The 5 most powerful species gathered in their private chamber, away from the main assembly floor. The situation is becoming critical, said Voice of Reason from the Harmony Collective. 17 aid programs have failed. Trade volumes are down 32%. Translation errors have caused 3 diplomatic incidents, and we are receiving reports of independence movements among subject species. The humans will return, said the Valkyrie representative, Elder Soth. They are emotional creatures. They will realize they need the Forum more than we need them. Jarn was not so sure. He had reviewed the reports carefully. The humans were not suffering from their withdrawal. If anything, They seemed relieved. They were redirecting resources to their own colonies, to bilateral agreements with species willing to work outside the forum structure. They were building something new. "What if they do not return?" Jarn asked. The chamber fell silent. Nobody wanted to consider that possibility. "Then we will need to adapt," Voice of Reason finally said. "We will need to find ways to replace what they provided." But everyone in that room knew the truth. What the humans had provided was not just resources, or technology, or medical care. They had provided something more fundamental. They had provided legitimacy. For 70 years, humans had been the forum's greatest advocates. They had believed in the institution. They had defended it. They had worked to make it better. When other species criticized the forum, humans had argued for reform from within. Now those same humans were telling the galaxy that the forum was beyond reform. They were saying it was built on corruption and could not be saved. And species across the galaxy were starting to believe them. In the human embassy on Earth, Daniel Harper watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy. The forum was struggling. Supply chains were breaking. Aid programs were failing. Translation systems were degraded. Everything that humans had quietly been supporting was falling apart. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Katie Morris asked him. She had been transferred back to Earth when the medical station shut down. Daniel thought about the Kelvin children he had seen in those secret reports. Taken from their families and called students. Worked until they collapsed and called education. He thought about the dozens of other species suffering under similar systems, all approved by the tribunal, all protected by the forum. "Yes," he said, "we did the right thing. The forum needed to fall. Sometimes you cannot fix something that is broken at its foundation. Sometimes you need to let it collapse and build something better." "And if people suffer in the meantime?" Katie asked. "They were already suffering," Daniel said. "The difference is that now everyone can see it. Now nobody can pretend the system works." Outside the embassy windows, the city lights of Geneva glowed against the night sky. Somewhere up there, the galaxy was watching humanity. Watching, and wondering what would come next. The silence from Earth was not emptiness. It was anticipation. The humans had left the forum. Now everyone was waiting to see what they would do instead. 6 months had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Forum. Admiral Gregory Pierce stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Liberty, watching the planet New Terra slowly rotate below. His ship was one of 12 in the human fleet currently positioned in neutral space near the Kelvin Confederacy border. They were not here to fight. They were here to watch. The news had broken 3 days ago. The Kelvin Confederacy had declared independence from Valkyrie protection. After 300 years of being exploited, of having their resources extracted and their children taken, the Kelvin had finally said enough. Gregory had been expecting this. Daniel Harper had been sharing the evidence of foreign corruption with other species for months now. Not publicly, not through official channels, just quiet conversations, private data transfers, confidential meetings with species who had suffered under the forum system. The Kelvin had been first on the list. They had the most to gain and the least to lose. Their economy had been hollowed out by Valkyrie exploitation. Their population was angry. They had nothing left to take. "Sir, we are detecting Valkyrie ships entering the system," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Susan Blake, reported. 12 warships, destroyer class. Gregory nodded. "Expected. Make sure all our sensors are recording. I want full documentation of everything that happens here." The Valkyrie were not going to let their prize colony go without a fight. The Kelvin were valuable. 3 centuries of infrastructure built on Kelvin labor. Mining operations that extracted rare minerals from Kelvin worlds. A captive market for Valkyrie goods. But the Valkyrie also knew that humanity was watching. That changed the calculation. On the planet below, the Kelvin leadership had gathered in their capital city. Professor Helen Morris, a human academic who specialized in interstellar law, had been advising them. She had helped them draft their Declaration of Independence. She had helped them understand their rights under the original Forum Charter, rights that had been ignored for centuries. Helen was not on New Terra. She was safely back on Earth, publishing her comprehensive report on Forum corruption. The document was 300 pages long and translated into 400 languages. It detailed systematic exploitation going back thousands of years. It named names. It provided evidence. It showed the galaxy exactly what the Forum really was. The report had gone viral across the galactic network. Billions of beings had downloaded it. Species that had been under Forum protection for centuries were reading about their own exploitation in clinical detail. Gregory watched his tactical display as the Valkyrie ships moved into position around Kelvin Prime. They were not attacking yet. They were posturing, trying to intimidate. "Sir, the Valkyrie fleet commander is broadcasting a message to the planet," Susan reported. "He is ordering the Kelvin government to rescind their declaration and submit to tribunal authority." "And the Kelvin response?" Gregory asked. Susan smiled slightly. "They told him to leave their system." The Valkyrie ships began running weapons drills, firing into empty space. It was a threat: submit or face bombardment. Gregory had seen this pattern before in the classified reports. The Forum had allowed this kind of intimidation for thousands of years. As long as the actual shooting stayed below a certain threshold, the tribunal called it internal security operations. "Open a channel to the Valkyrie flagship," Gregory ordered. A moment later, the Valkyrie commander appeared on the screen. He looked like a massive slug, his skin glistening with moisture. His translator rendered his speech into flat, emotionless English. "Human vessel, you are in Valkyrie-protected space. Depart immediately." Gregory kept his voice calm and professional. "Admiral Gregory Pierce of Earth Defense Forces. We are in neutral space, observing events in the Kelvin system. We have no intention of interfering in your operations." "Then why are you here?" "To watch," Gregory said, "and to record. Everything you do here will be documented and shared with the galactic community. We are simply ensuring transparency." The Valkyrie commander was silent for a long moment. Gregory could almost see him thinking. If they attacked the Kelvin now, humanity would have evidence. That evidence would spread across the galaxy. Other subject species would see what happened to those who tried to leave. But everyone would also see the Valkyrie using military force against an unarmed population. In the past, the Forum had looked the other way. Now, with humans actively spreading evidence of Forum crimes, every action would be scrutinized. "This is an internal matter," the Valkyrie commander finally said. "It does not concern humanity." "Everything concerns humanity now," Gregory replied. "We are no longer bound by Forum rules about non-interference. We will observe what we choose to observe. We will document what we choose to document. And we will share that documentation with anyone who wants to see it." The channel closed. Gregory watched as the Valkyrie fleet maintained position for another hour. Then, slowly, they began to withdraw. They left the system completely. "They backed down," Susan said, sounding surprised. "They had no choice," Gregory said. "They could not afford to give us footage of them bombarding civilian targets. Not now, not with the whole galaxy watching." Down on Kelvin Prime, celebrations erupted. For the first time in 300 years, they were actually free. But the Kelvin were just the beginning. 2 weeks later, the Sostan Empire faced a similar crisis. 3 of their subject species declared independence simultaneously. The Sostans were more aggressive than the Valkyrie. They sent military forces to all 3 systems. Colonel Ryan Brooks was ready. He commanded a small human observation force that had been positioned near Sostan space. When the Sostan fleet moved to attack the first breakaway species, Ryan made sure human ships were there, sensors recording everything. The Sostans did not back down as quickly as the Valkyrie had. They began orbital bombardment of military targets on the rebel world. Ryan broadcast everything live across the galactic network. Billions of beings watched as the Sostan Empire demonstrated exactly what happened to species who tried to leave. They watched cities burn. They watched refugees flee. They watched what the Forum had always tolerated as internal security. But this time, there was no Forum to cover it up. There were no tribunal officials to declare the matter resolved. There was just the raw footage of a powerful species crushing a weaker one. Ryan sent a single message to the Sostan fleet commander. "The galaxy is watching. History will remember what you do here." The bombardment stopped. The Sostan Empire had just realized that they could not maintain their empire through force if every act of violence was documented and broadcast. Their economy depended on trade with other species. Their reputation mattered. Within a month, all three rebel species had successfully separated from Sostan control. The Empire had backed down rather than face complete diplomatic isolation. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. Subject species could leave their protectors. The Forum would not stop them. The Tribunal would not intervene. And humanity would make sure the whole galaxy watched any attempt at violent retaliation. By the end of the 7th month, 23 species had declared independence. The number kept growing. Elder Jarn sat in his private chambers on Nexus Prime, reviewing the reports. The Forum was losing control. The whole system was collapsing. Species that had been subjects for thousands of years were walking away. The Council of Elders called emergency meetings almost daily now. Everyone had suggestions: increase tribunal forces, offer reforms, promise better treatment, but nothing worked. The momentum had shifted. Voice of Reason from the Harmony Collective tried to be optimistic. This is a temporary crisis. Once the subject species realize they cannot survive without Forum protection, they will return. But Jarn knew better. He had been studying humanity for the past 6 months, trying to understand them. What he had learned terrified him. Humans were not just documenting Forum crimes. They were actively helping the breakaway species survive. Trade agreements were being signed between Earth and newly independent worlds. Human advisors were helping them establish governments. Human loans were funding their transitions to independence. Humanity was building an alternative to the Forum. They were doing it quietly, without grand announcements. But they were doing it. Katie Morris had been reassigned to the Earth Diplomatic Corps after the medical station closure. Her new job was coordinating humanitarian aid to newly independent species. She worked 18-hour days, connecting food shipments, medical supplies, and technical assistance to worlds that had just broken free from their protectors. "How many species are we currently assisting?" she asked her supervisor, a diplomatic officer named Ben Carter. Ben checked his files. "That number will probably increase next month. We have reports of 6 more species preparing independence declarations." Katie felt a sense of satisfaction. The Forum had controlled these species for centuries. They had extracted their wealth, suppressed their development, and called it protection. Now those same species were finally free. "What about the Forum?" she asked. "How are they responding?" "They are panicking," Ben said with a slight smile. "The Council keeps sending messages to Earth, asking for meetings. They want to negotiate. They want to understand what we want." "What do we tell them?" "Nothing," Ben said. "We are done talking to them. We are focused on building something better." That something better did not have a name yet. It was not an organization or an alliance. It was just a growing network of species who had chosen to work together, without Forum interference. Trade agreements, defense pacts, scientific cooperation. All of it happened outside the forum structure. All of it happened between sovereign equals, not between protectors and subjects. Daniel Harper watched it all happening from his office in Geneva. The forum was dying. Not quickly, but inevitably. Like a tree with rotten roots, it was only a matter of time before it fell. He received a message from Lisa Grant. She was on New Terra, meeting with representatives from 15 newly independent species. They wanted to formalize their cooperation. They wanted to create something permanent. "What should we call it?" Lisa asked him over the video call. Daniel thought for a moment. "Keep it simple. Call it what it is. The Free Assembly." Lisa nodded. "The Free Assembly. I like that. Equal voices, no protectors or subjects, just species working together." "Exactly," Daniel said. The galaxy had watched in confusion as humanity left the forum. Then they had watched in shock as subject species followed. Now they were watching in growing terror as an alternative to the forum took shape. The old powers were finally understanding what humanity had done. By walking away, humans had not just abandoned the forum. They had shown everyone else that leaving was possible, that freedom was possible, that the system could be changed. And that realization was more dangerous to the forum than any weapon. 1 year after humanity's departure from the Galactic Forum, Elder Jarn stood before the council chamber and admitted something that had been unthinkable 12 months earlier. The forum was dying. The numbers told the story. 23 species had declared independence in the first 6 months. That number had grown to 57 by the end of the year. Trade through forum channels had dropped by 60%. The common currency was failing as species lost confidence in forum stability. Dozens of aid programs had collapsed completely. But the real crisis was not the numbers. It was the fear. For 12,000 years, the forum had been the center of galactic civilization. Membership was forever. Authority was absolute. The system was stable. Now that stability was revealed as an illusion, and the species who had built their power on that illusion were terrified. Elder Jarn had made a decision that the other council members had opposed. He was going to Earth, not to negotiate through intermediaries, not to send messages through diplomatic channels. He was going to meet with the humans directly and find out what they wanted. The other elders thought he was surrendering. Maybe they were right. But Jarn had lived for 600 years, and he knew when a battle was already lost. The question now was whether anything could be salvaged from the defeat. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks. Jarn traveled alone, in a small diplomatic vessel. No escorts, no ceremony, no grand announcement. He simply requested a meeting with President Karen White, and was granted one. Earth surprised him. He had expected a fortress world, heavily defended and suspicious. Instead, he found a planet that seemed relaxed and confident. Human ships moved freely through the system. Trade stations bustled with activity. Everything seemed normal. The humans had not been hurt by leaving the forum. If anything, they seemed relieved to be free of it. Jarn was brought to Geneva, to the old United Nations building where humanity had once governed itself before reaching the stars. President Karen White met him in a simple conference room. No guards, no weapons, just 2 leaders sitting across a table from each other. "Thank you for seeing me," Jarn said through his translator. Karen White was an older woman with gray hair and calm eyes. She studied Jarn for a moment before responding. "I am curious why you came. The forum has nothing we want." "I came to understand," Jarn said, "to learn what we did wrong, to see if there is any possibility of reconciliation." Karen smiled slightly. "You really do not understand, do you? This is not about reconciliation. This is about justice." Over the next 3 days, Jarn was put on trial. Not in a legal sense. There were no charges, No formal proceedings, but President White had assembled a team led by Lieutenant Commander Steve Harrison, a human military prosecutor. They presented evidence of war crimes committed under Forum authority, genocides ignored by the tribunal, economic exploitation that had impoverished entire species, slavery systems approved and protected by Forum law. The evidence filled 3 full days of testimony. Jarn listened to it all. Some of it he had known about. Much of it he had suspected, but never confirmed. Some of it shocked even him. The humans had been thorough in their investigation. They had found things that had been buried for thousands of years. On the 3rd day, Karen White asked him a simple question. Why should we return to an institution built on oppression? Why should we give legitimacy to a system that has caused so much suffering? Jarn had no answer. Every argument he had prepared seemed hollow in the face of the evidence. The Forum was guilty of everything the humans accused it of. There was no defense, no justification, no excuse. What do you want? Jarn finally asked. What would it take for humanity to forgive what has been done? Forgiveness is not ours to give, Karen said. We were not the victims. Ask the Kelvin about forgiveness. Ask the 42 species enslaved by the Sostans. Ask the millions who died while the tribunal looked away. Then what? Jarn asked. What happens now? Karen stood and walked to the window. Outside, Geneva was bright with spring sunshine. The Forum will collapse. That is inevitable now. The question is whether it collapses peacefully or violently, whether the old powers can accept the new reality, or whether they will fight to maintain control they have already lost. And humanity's role in this? We are building something better, Karen said, something based on consent and equality, something transparent and accountable. We call it the Free Assembly. Jarn had heard of it. Intelligence reports had been coming in for months. The Free Assembly was growing rapidly. Currently, 120 species had joined. Unlike the Forum, membership was voluntary and could be revoked at any time. Unlike the Forum, there were no protectors and subjects. Every species had equal voice, regardless of size or power. You are creating a rival to the Forum, Jarn said. No, Karen corrected. We are creating an alternative. Species are free to choose. Many are choosing us because we offer something the Forum never did. Actual democracy, actual justice, actual equality. While Jarn was learning hard truths on Earth, Captain Beth Nelson was building the future in the Outer Rim. She had been assigned to coordinate the Free Assembly's first physical gathering. 120 species were sending representatives to New Terra for a constitutional convention. Beth had spent months preparing. The logistics were complex. Different species had different environmental needs. Translation systems had to be perfect. Security had to be tight but not oppressive. Everything had to demonstrate that this new system would be different from the old one. The Constitutional Convention opened on schedule. Species from across the galaxy gathered in a massive hall built specifically for this purpose. Unlike the Forum's Crystal Palace on Nexus Prime, this hall was simple and functional. No grand displays of power. No elevated platforms for the mighty. Every delegation had the same seating, the same resources, the same voice. Beth watched from the observation deck as the delegates debated the fundamental principles of their new association. It was messy. Different species had different priorities. Arguments broke out. Compromises had to be reached. But nobody was threatening anyone. Nobody was pulling rank based on age or power. They were actually trying to build something together. The Constitution that emerged after 6 weeks of debate was simple. 3 core principles: sovereign equality of all members, transparent governance with no secret courts or hidden fees, and absolute prohibition on exploitation of any member by any other member. Any violation of these principles would result in immediate expulsion from the assembly. Any member could leave at any time, for any reason. Decisions required consensus of at least 70% of members. It was everything the Forum was not. Back on Nexus Prime, the Forum was attempting to respond. The Council of Elders had proposed reforms. They offered to restructure the tribunal. They promised to investigate corruption. They pledged to end exploitation of subject species. The trust was gone. Once people saw what the system really was, they could not unsee it. Voice of Reason from the Harmony Collective tried to maintain optimism in council meetings. We still have over 200 species in the Forum. We are still the majority. We can rebuild. But the mathematics were against them. Of the 200 remaining species, most were the old powers who benefited from the corrupt system. The species who had actually believed in the Forum's stated principles had already left. What remained was a collection of exploiters and those too afraid to leave. Elder Soth of the Valkyrie proposed a different approach. We should use military force, crush the Free Assembly before it grows stronger. Make an example of the humans. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew this was suicide. Humanity had a formidable military. More importantly, any attack on the Free Assembly would unite its members. It would transform a loose association into a defensive alliance overnight. No, Jarn said when he returned from Earth. Military force is not an option. We have already lost. The question now is how we end this with dignity. The other elders stared at him. You surrender? Elder Soth asked incredulously. I recognize reality, Jarn replied. The Forum is finished. It has been finished since the moment humanity walked out. We just did not realize it yet. He told them everything he had learned on Earth, the evidence of crimes, the moral bankruptcy of their system, the alternative that was being built. By the time he finished, even the most stubborn council members understood. The terror was not about losing power. The terror was about understanding how wrong they had been. For thousands of years, they had convinced themselves that the Forum was necessary, that exploitation was acceptable if it maintained stability, that the suffering of subject species was the price of galactic order. Now they saw the truth. The suffering had been unnecessary. The exploitation had been chosen, not required. The system had been corrupt from its foundation, and they had all been complicit. Commander Jake Sullivan had returned to active duty after the medical station closure. He was now part of the Free Assembly's humanitarian coordination team. His job was helping newly independent species build their own medical infrastructure. It was harder work than running a Forum medical station. He could not just provide care. He had to teach these species to provide care for themselves. He had to help them build systems that would outlast any single donor. But it was better work, more meaningful, because he was not creating dependency. He was creating capacity. How many species have established independent medical systems? She was working in the same department now. Jake checked his records. 43 so far. Another 20 are in progress. It will take years to complete, but they will have real healthcare systems, not dependent on charity, not vulnerable to exploitation. Katie smiled. That is what we should have been doing all along. Yes, Jake agreed, but we could not do it within the Forum structure. The Forum needed dependent species. It needed recipients of charity who would be grateful and compliant. Real development, real independence, real equality. Those things threaten the system. So we had to destroy the system to help people, Katie said. Sometimes you do, Jake replied. As the year ended, the Free Assembly had grown to 187 members. The Forum had shrunk to 93. The crossover point had been passed. The Free Assembly was now the majority. Species began referring to Forum members as the Old Alliance. Some used less polite terms, the remnant of a failed system, the last holdouts of an unjust age. Elder Jarn knew what had to come next. The forum could not simply fade away. It had to formally end, dissolve with whatever dignity remained, give its members a clean path to move forward. He called for a vote. The Council of Elders would recommend that the full forum vote on dissolution, a clean end, an acknowledgement that their time had passed. Not everyone agreed. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to maintain the pretense that the forum still mattered. But Jarn had the majority. The vote was scheduled. The terror the galaxy had felt was evolving into something else. Acceptance, understanding, perhaps even relief. The old order was ending. Something new was beginning. And while change was always frightening, this change felt like it might actually be better. Humanity had shown the galaxy that walking away from injustice was possible. Now the galaxy was learning that building something better was possible too. The question was whether the old powers could accept their role in the new order. Not as rulers, not as protectors, just as equals among equals. That would be the final test. 3 years after humanity walked out of the crystal halls of the Galactic Forum, Elder Jarn stood before the near-empty chamber one final time. Only 43 species remained in the forum. The vast hall that had once held 300 delegations now echoed with emptiness. The other species had not been expelled. They had simply left. One by one, over the course of 3 years, they had walked away. Some joined the Free Assembly immediately. Others remained independent for a while, unsure of what to do. But almost all of them eventually chose the new system over the old one. The vote had been scheduled for months. Everyone knew what it would be. The forum would vote to dissolve itself. After 12,000 years, the great institution of galactic governance would cease to exist. Jarn looked around the chamber. Elder Soth of the Valkyrie was there, though he refused to meet Jarn's eyes. Voice of Reason from the Harmony Collective sat quietly, their usual optimism finally exhausted. The Sosthan delegates looked bitter. A few smaller species who had benefited from forum corruption looked worried about their futures. "We stand at the end of an age," Jarn began, his voice carrying through the vast space. "For 12,000 years, this forum has been the center of galactic civilization. We built it with good intentions. We believed we were creating order from chaos. We believed we were protecting the weak and advancing civilization." He paused, letting the weight of history settle. "We were wrong." Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Speaking this truth aloud in this place was difficult, but it needed to be said. "We built an empire and called it governance," Jarn continued. "We created exploitation and called it protection. We allowed suffering and called it stability. The humans showed us what we had become. They held up a mirror, and we did not like what we saw." Outside the forum complex, Ambassador Lisa Grant waited. She had not set foot in these halls since the day humanity withdrew. She had sworn she would never return. But today was different. Today she was not here as a forum member. She was here as a witness to its end. Commander Jack Murphy stood beside her, his small fleet in orbit around Nexus Prime. The ships were there to ensure the old powers did not try to use force to maintain their grip. But there had been no threats, no last-minute military actions. The old powers had accepted their fate with surprising grace. "Do you think they understand?" Jack asked Lisa quietly. "Some of them do," Lisa replied. "Jarn understands. Voice of Reason understands. The Valkyrie and Sosthans are just going through the motions. But understanding or not, it does not matter. The result is the same." Inside the chamber, Jarn was calling for the vote. "All delegations in favor of formal dissolution of the Galactic Forum, please indicate." Every delegation voted yes. Even those who had fought against this moment to the end recognized that continuing was pointless. The forum was already dead. This was just making it official. The measure passes unanimously, Zorn announced. By the authority vested in this council, and with the consent of all member species, the Galactic Forum is hereby dissolved. This chamber is closed. Our work is finished. The silence that followed was profound. 12,000 years of history ended not with grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but with a simple vote and quiet acceptance. The delegates began to leave. No ceremony, no final celebration. They just stood, gathered their belongings, and walked out. The crystal halls that had witnessed so much history slowly emptied. Zorn was the last to leave. He stood alone in the chamber for a long moment, looking at the empty seats. Then he too walked out, closing the great doors behind him. Outside, Lisa Grant was waiting for him. "Ambassador Grant," Jarn said, his translator rendering his surprise. "I did not expect to see you here." "I promised myself I would never return to the Forum," Lisa said. "But the Forum no longer exists, does it?" "I came to witness the end, and to discuss the future." "The future belongs to your free assembly now," Jarn said. "No," Lisa corrected gently. "The future belongs to everyone. The free assembly is just a tool, a way for species to cooperate as equals. Your species is welcome to join, if you choose." Jarn was silent for a moment. "After everything we have done?" "After everything everyone has done," Lisa said. "The free assembly is not about punishment or revenge. It is about building something better. That requires everyone, including the species who benefited from the old system." 5 years after humanity deserted the Forum, the Free Assembly held its first full Congress on New Terra. 342 species attended. That was more than had ever belonged to the Forum at its peak. The difference was that every species here had chosen to come. Nobody was coerced. Nobody was pressured. They came because they believed in the principles: equal representation, transparent governance, no exploitation. Captain Daniel Harper, now retired from active diplomatic service, watched from the observation deck. He was 73 years old now. His hair was completely gray, his hands sometimes shook, but his eyes were still sharp, and his mind was still clear. A young Kelvin diplomat approached him. Her name was Sina, and she had been one of the children mentioned in Daniel's original report. She had been taken from her family at age 7 and put to work in a Valkyrie factory. The humans had helped return her home when the Kelvin gained independence. Now she was 22 and representing her people in the Free Assembly. "Captain Harper," Sina said, her translator rendering her musical language into English. "I wanted to thank you. Without your investigation, without the evidence you gathered, my people would still be enslaved." Daniel shook his head. "I just documented what was already happening. Your people freed themselves." "But you showed us it was possible," Sina insisted. "You showed us that the system could be challenged, that walking away was an option. That terrified the Forum, did it not? That is why they collapsed." Daniel smiled. "Yes, I suppose it did terrify them. They built their power on the assumption that nobody would dare leave, that membership was forever, that the weak needed the strong." "And you proved them wrong," Sina said. "We proved that freedom is always an option," Daniel replied. "That is the thing about tyranny. It only survives when good people are too afraid to leave. We were not brave. We were just done being complicit in injustice." Down on the Congress floor, the delegates were debating trade policy. It was a complex discussion. 342 species had 342 different economic systems. Finding common ground was difficult. But they were doing it, without threats, without pressure. without powerful species forcing their will on weaker ones. They were actually negotiating as equals. Dr. Paul Richardson, humanity's chief historian, was documenting everything. His job was to ensure that future generations understood how this moment came to be, how the old order fell and the new order rose. What do you think will be remembered most about this period? His assistant, a young historian named Sophie Martin, asked him. Paul thought carefully before answering. People will remember that humanity walked away, that we looked at an institution everyone else accepted as permanent and said no, that we refused to participate in our own oppression or the oppression of others. Is that enough? Sophie asked. Just walking away? It was everything, Paul said. The Forum survived for 12,000 years because everyone believed it was necessary. When we demonstrated that it was not, when we showed that we could survive and even thrive without it, we broke the spell. We showed other species that they did not need to accept exploitation as the price of stability. The Free Assembly Congress continued for 3 weeks. At the end, they had established trade agreements, defense pacts, and cultural exchange programs. They had created a common currency backed by the economies of all member species, not just the powerful ones. They had established courts that would hear disputes between species, with judges drawn from neutral parties. It was not perfect. There were arguments and disagreements. Some species wanted more centralized authority. Others wanted complete independence. Compromises had to be reached, but it was democratic. It was transparent. It was accountable. And it was fundamentally different from what had come before. Elder Jarn had chosen to attend the Congress as an observer. His species had not yet joined the Free Assembly. They were still deciding, still processing their fall from power, still learning to think of themselves as equals rather than rulers. On the final day, President Karen White invited him to a private meeting. They met in the same conference room where they had first talked 5 years earlier. Have you decided? Karen asked. Will your species join us? I believe we will, Jarn said, though it is difficult for my people. We are used to being in charge. Being just another voice among hundreds is humbling. Good, Karen said simply. Humility is important. The Forum fell because the powerful forgot how to be humble. They forgot that their power came from the consent of others, not from some inherent right to rule. You could have taken revenge, Jarn said. When the Forum collapsed, humanity could have seized control. You had the military force. You had the economic power. You could have built your own empire. We could have, Karen agreed, but that would have just recreated the problem. The issue was never who was in charge. The issue was the idea that anyone should be in charge, that any species should have power over others without their consent. So you built a system without rulers, Jarn said. We built a system where everyone rules together, Karen corrected, where power is shared and distributed, where no single species can dominate. It is messier than the old way. It is slower. It is less efficient. But it is more just. Jake Sullivan had been appointed to head the Free Assembly's development agency. His job was coordinating assistance to species that were still building their infrastructure after breaking free from Forum control. It was exhausting work. He traveled constantly. Every species had different needs. Every situation required custom solutions. There was never enough time or resources. But it was better than running a charity medical station had been. Because he was not just treating symptoms. He was helping species build the capacity to solve their own problems. Katie Morris worked with him, now as his deputy director. Together, they had helped 87 species establish independent medical, educational, and economic systems. Do you ever miss the old days? Katie asked him one evening as they reviewed project reports. When we could just show up, provide help, and leave? Jake thought about it. Sometimes, it was simpler, but simple is not always better. We were creating dependency then. Now we are creating independence. That is harder, but more important. The Forum never wanted independent species, Katie said. They wanted grateful subjects. Exactly, Jake agreed. And that is why they fell. You cannot build a stable system on dependency and gratitude. You can only build it on equality and mutual respect. Captain Beth Nelson had been promoted to admiral. She now commanded the Free Assembly's Joint Defense Force, a volunteer coalition of ships from 60 different species. It was not a large force. It did not need to be. The Free Assembly did not conquer. It did not expand through force. It grew because species chose to join. And they chose to join because they saw something better than what they had before. The old Forum species had mostly joined by now. The Valkyrie, the Sostans, even the Harmony Collective, all had swallowed their pride and accepted membership as equals. Some did so grudgingly. Others, like Jarn's species, seemed genuinely committed to the new way. Time would tell which was which. Daniel Harper spent his final years writing. He wanted to make sure the lessons of this period were not forgotten. He wanted future generations to understand what had happened and why. His book was called simply The Walkaway. It detailed humanity's withdrawal from the Forum and the cascade of events that followed. It explained the moral reasoning. It documented the evidence of Forum crimes. It analyzed the collapse and the rise of the Free Assembly. But most importantly, it ended with a warning. The Free Assembly is better than the Forum was. But it is not perfect. It is not immune to corruption. The same forces that destroyed the Forum, greed, fear, the desire for power, still exist. The only defense is vigilance. The only protection is the willingness to walk away again, if necessary. Freedom is not a destination. It is a practice. It requires constant effort, constant attention, constant courage to say no when saying yes would be easier. Sina read Daniel's book when it was published. She was 35 now, a senior diplomat in the Kelvin delegation. She understood what he meant. The Free Assembly was not guaranteed to last forever. It would last only as long as its members were willing to defend its principles. But that was true of anything worth having. Democracy, justice, equality. All of them required constant defense against those who would corrupt them. The galaxy had learned what humans knew all along. The most powerful act of rebellion is to simply refuse to participate in your own oppression. The Forum had watched in terror as humans deserted because they understood what that meant. It meant the end of their power, the end of their system, the end of an age built on exploitation disguised as civilization, and the beginning of something better. Not perfect, never perfect, but built on consent rather than coercion, on equality rather than hierarchy, on justice rather than convenience. The galaxy had watched in terror, then in confusion, then in understanding, and finally in hope. Because if humans could walk away from injustice and build something better, then maybe anyone could. Maybe everyone could. And that changed everything.